Hello and welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria, the continent, and all around the world. I am Kelly Egiga. Every now and then we'll film from different parts of cities and the continent. But today we're filming from the ancient city of Ibadan. And we're right here to capture the incredible story of Dr. Rachel Titilayo Leslie. She's the director of the African Historical Society, who's making efforts to preserve our culture and history. Let's get to hear her story.
Ibadan on a rainy day can be quite charming. The rain brings a sense of calmness and coziness to this city. It's a great excuse to stay indoors and enjoy a warm cup of tea or coffee or explore the city's many indoor attractions. But we are headed for the University of Ibadan.
And he will definitely win the Super League as well in Turkey. And let's talk about his future. Joseph Ashikba, good morning to you. I ask a question on the station that keeps you fresh all day.
Our mission here is to meet with Dr. Leslie, a renowned Pan-African scholar and director of the African Historical Society.
Hi, Dr. Leslie.
Hi, good afternoon.
Absolutely. It's an absolute delight to finally get to speak with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Dr. Leslie, a trailblazing scholar, is dedicated to preserving and promoting African history and culture.
You were born in Paris, France, to Jamaican and Nigerian parents. You got your education in the US, in Germany, and right here in Nigeria. Talk to us about that experience of having to travel all around the world.
I always say that I was spoon-fed a global or an international identity. And in fact, I am, a Pan-African human being, as well as a quote-unquote Pan-African scholar, because as you say, I was born in Paris. I was born in Paris in a time when Black intelligentsia was gathered in Paris. My father was, who's the first man of African descent to do his PhD for mathematics at the University of Paris, was there in Paris at a time when Chakanta Diop was there, his friend Richard Wright, Langston Hughes. I refer to that era of French history as Paris Noir, Black Paris, and so there were a lot of Black intellectuals, a lot of Black artists there, and so I was born there. Du Bois was there at that time. In fact, my parents had lunch with him. These were the sorts of bedtime stories that I had growing up, were about their encounters with people like Richard Wright and Langston Hughes and Du Bois and Chakanta Diop, who was a close family friend. So, I grew up hearing about his battle to get his PhD thesis, The Origin of African Civilization, Myth or Reality, accepted by the university, which was a 10-year battle. So I was born into this sort of ambiance of Pan-Africanism, of activism, and then after that, my parents had met actually here on this campus.
Oh, wow.
So my father actually became a professor of mathematics here at University of Ibadan.
Oh, wow.
At a time when the recently late Professor Oluloyo, or Governor Oluloyo, as many know him, was also teaching in the mathematics department with my father, and the two of them were like brothers. In fact, a week or so before he died, I put them on WhatsApp video so that they could They
Okay.
could talk.
Interact and all.
And Ololoyo was as bright as ever until the end. Just a brilliant, brilliant man. And so then my mother, she was a student here at University of Ibadan, and my mother was the first Nigerian to graduate with a first class from University of Ibadan. And so I spent, a bit of my childhood at University of California, Berkeley, until my father was tenured at Northwestern University. And then I went to Northwestern University. I grew up on that campus. I grew up on Northwestern University campus in Evanston, Illinois. I was elected to be president of the Black Student Council while I was there. And, I was young and much more of an activist than I am now. I'm more of a scholar of manuscript studies now. But then, we invited Louis Farrakhan, we invited Angela Davis, we invited the ANC and Inkatha parties to the university, and we were, you know, I was very much pushing for Pan-African relationships between African Americans and African scholars. And so Northwestern University was a very, very important time in my development.
As director of the African Historical Society, she works tirelessly to preserve African heritage.
I have a different understanding of the demise of African civilization and African glory. I think that we played a part in it. I don't think that we're just victims in this story. I think that we had agency in our demise. And I think that one of the most detrimental aspects of African culture, of West African culture at the time, was the slave trade. And I think that the deadly combination of the discovery of the New World, primitive capitalism, and slavery that had existed in West Africa long before the Europeans got here. I mean, the Europeans arrived in West Africa to an existing slave trade. The West African elite and ruling class had been selling people to Arabs. I suspect that this relationship between the slave markets of Libya that we see today and West Africa are not new. And I think that the fevered pitch of the slave trade, of the transatlantic slave trade, because of its industrial connection to the cotton gin in the Americas and coffee, put so much wealth and money into the trade in human souls that it became destructive to the society. And I think that there were inter-clandestine wars and conflicts within West Africa at the time that lended itself to self-destruction. I think that we played a much bigger role in our demise than is presented to us. And I think that it's very, very important that we understand that so that we can progress. We have to take responsibility to a certain extent to the demise of our civilizations. We were not just passive victims in the transatlantic slave trade. Many families, wealthy families, elite families, and royal families became enormously wealthy. When you look at the number of, I'm a descendant of Yorubas, so rather than speak about other people, let me speak about let me criticize my own ancestors on my mother's side. If you look at the number of Yorubas that were being sold during the transatlantic slave trade, and you look at estimates for the Yoruba population at that time, it's staggering. It's staggering, the percentage of people that were sold. Recently, just before Professor Ololoyo passed away when I went to see him. After he spoke to my father, you know, he was a great intellectual, so we spoke for hours. And he asked me, he said, "Why do you think there's so much witchcraft in Nigerian society?" He said, "Why do you think that in Yoruba culture in particular, witchcraft is so predominant?" And I said, "Well, you know, I think it goes back to the slave trade because see, I had just finished reading about the percentages of people that were disappearing and the prevalence of the capturing of slaves. You know, you read the history of Queen Moremi and others, and you realize how prevalent it was, how people were selling each other into slavery. It seems from the estimates I've looked into 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people was being sold into slavery. So you have to imagine a situation in which 1 in 3, 1 in 4 people is vanishing and you never see them again. You know, wouldn't you start making amulets and sacrifices and hanging them on yourselves and your loved ones so that they don't disappear? I mean, Professor Shoinka he's at the International Orisha Festival, where Orisha worshippers from all over the world have come to Nigeria. And when I looked at the countries, you know, as there are Ifa worshippers who came here from Brazil, from Argentina, from Trinidad and Tobago, from Cuba, from the south of the United States, all of these people were sold, are the descendants of those sold. So you have to imagine that context, and I think that that was, you know, and when the Europeans were purchasing people from the slave traders, you know, the Europeans rarely went into the interior themselves. Those were our forefathers who were going to catch people and then taking them to the coast to sell them. And the Europeans, let me just say this one thing, it's very important. The Europeans preferred skilled labor, okay? So that was your iron workers, the people perhaps making these pavements, your civil engineers, your woodworkers, your learned men, people who could write. We have cases in the United States on the American side of slaves who wrote letters to the Queen of England, who wrote letters to presidents asking for their freedom. So literate people were being sold into slavery from West Africa. So again, this is, I'm sure that what needs to be studied, and I said this to Professor Asante, and he said, you should write on this, but I'm busy with with other things. I want somebody to study in depth the effect of the transatlantic slave trade on West African institutions. Not on those who left, but on the societies here.
I mean, talking about Africa and the question of leadership, we see that Ibrahim Traore has grabbed the headlines in very recent times. So when you look at someone like him, and you look at the continent and the quest for true or effective leadership, I wonder perhaps what your thoughts are.
Rather than to characterize ourselves by victimhood, let's say, have we learned from the past? I don't think that we yet have, but there are some who have. And I think that Ibrahim Traore is an example of an African who's learned from the past, who's learned from the distant past, the recent past. I would say that he is a child of Sankara.
What does that mean?
Sankara was an African young military man like Ibrahim Traore, who was also very African-centered, very Pan-African in his thinking. So Ibrahim is very much like his forefather Sankara, like Nyerere, like Mandela, like Senghor, like Lumumba. So Ibrahim Traore is very much coming out of this decolonial tradition in Africa of negritude and Pan-Africanism, Nkrumah, I would add, the early Nkrumah,
Yeah.
I would add to that group. And so I think Ibrahim Traore is coming out of that tradition of African leadership. So I think that he's doing amazing things in terms of, you know, trying to repurpose the resources of his country for development, for human development, and also industrial development and infrastructure and all of those things that he's doing. He has to take care to, as a military leader, that the discursive, intellectual spaces in the society are not atrophied by military culture, right? He has to be careful to find a balance between the militaristic nationalization of the resources of the region for the benefit of Africans and preserving a discursive, intellectual space in the society and in civil society, that military culture doesn't end up dominating the society. But I think that, you know, and the African Historical Society is a non-political institution. We're super political, so we try not to, you know, take sides in political movements. We cooperate with incumbent governments all over Africa. So that's what I would say about Ibrahim Traore. I think it's not a new phenomenon. It's perhaps, you know, novel in this period. I think Gaddafi was trying to do a lot of the similar sorts of things that Ibrahim Traore is doing.
And so are you afraid for his life as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, you know, global economics being what they are, that his life is in danger. Like, I don't know any heads of state that don't have the most professional security in the world. I mean, you know, in amongst their populations. I mean, that's part of the nature of being a head of state. But in his particular case, because he's upsetting global economic structures and global economic interests, he needs to be very, very careful.
So when you look at him and look at Nigeria with all of the potential and natural resources, is that the kind of transformation you'd like to see here in Nigeria?
I think that Nigeria does not require a military junta to be able to transform itself. I think that Nigeria has because of the staggering wealth of Nigeria. I think Nigeria is maybe richer than the Congo. I mean, you know, I don't think there's a natural resource that's not found in Nigeria. And then Nigeria also has the human, what the World Bank problematically calls human capital. You know, it has a population of 200 million. There's oil, there's natural gas, there's uranium, there's titanium, there's diamonds, there's gold. There's this incredibly lush and fertile land. There's sunlight, there's rain, there's water. Nigeria is incredibly wealthy, and Nigeria also exports skilled labor. And educated people. So I think that, you know, Nigeria playing a leadership role in Africa is long overdue. I think that Nigeria could easily surpass what Ibrahim Traore is doing. There's a culture of exploitation that has never been deconstructed in Nigeria. So the slave trade was not ended by Nigerians. Okay? Nigeria was forced to stop selling slaves by European forces after the Europeans had outlawed slavery.
Yeah.
Right? And then colonialism was never really imposed, you know, in the way that you were implying. It was a deal between the Nigerian elite and the British. And the Nigerian elite colluded with the British to provide the natural resources to the governors, right? There was this whole structure put in place between the governor and then the governor, and then all of the kings and the obas and all of them, they served at the pleasure of the colonial governor, and they delivered the resources to them. Okay. Now then colonialism ended in Nigeria by a tabletop meeting. You didn't have a sort of a Mau Mau. You didn't have a revolution like Shaka Zulu.
Yeah.
So it was a tabletop meeting, and then so you had the Nigerian elite basically take over from the colonial masters to the point of moving into their homes in Victoria Island, right? So University of London was transformed into University of Ibadan, and the elite moved from right into the position of the colonial master. And I don't think there has ever been a deconstruction of the colonial infrastructure. Everything is still structured in such a way for it to go outside of Nigeria.
Okay.
Dangote's refinery, what he's trying to do with his refinery will upset the sort of economic infrastructure that I'm talking about. And that's why I think Dangote is having such difficulty with his refinery, because again, this is something that will upset global economic systems for Nigerians to start participating in the wealth that they create. I mean, at one time, 10 years ago or so, I looked at a price of a barrel of Nigerian oil. I think it was like 10 or 15 years ago when I was looking at natural resources and the percentage to which African countries participate in them. I think a barrel of oil at that time was going for like $14. And the Aramco ships were right off the shore of Nigeria, filling their ships at the Bonny Light offshore terminal. And then they would resell each barrel for like $125. So they were buying it at $14 and reselling it at like $125. So that entire margin Nigeria is not participating in. So the reason Ibrahim Traore is able to do what he's able to do is because overnight, he more than, I mean, he increased by something like 500, 600% the participation of his country in the gold revenues. So those sorts of things upset global markets. It's not an easy thing. I mean, even Dangote, the richest African who's trying to build a refinery, is coming up against that global resistance. So it's not an easy task, but I think it can be done.
As a proud member of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, she tells me how she starts her day.
I try to start my day with prayer every day. Try to start with prayer and meditation. Sort of centers my thought and centers me. So this is my prayer area here.
Okay.
And this is a sort of typical Ethiopian Orthodox prayer area. You'll notice that we dress our icons. We sort of feel like they should be dressed and should be adorned. So we don't just have our icons. They're unadorned. And so you'll see first Kadistingo Mariam Hue, Our Lady St. Mary with Christ and with St. Mark and St. Gabriel on the other side. And then two pillars of the church, Yared and Ephraim. Those are prayers that we do every day. And then this is Abuna Kadus Tekla Haymanot, and he was the first Ethiopian saint whose history I read when I lived in the first monastery. And so I feel a particular kinship to him. I went to his birthplace and I went to the place where he was buried. He was a 13th century Ethiopian saint.
I was just going to ask you about the height.
The reason why the icons are put up so high is because in Orthodoxy we try and remind ourselves of certain tenets of the faith through physical realities. So I have a tendency to put icons in the highest place in the room to remind me that God is above me, and that I'm below God. And then also, we believe there are teachings in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that it's important to subjugate the flesh to the spirit and to the mind. So, we have various exercises that we do that have to do with allowing your soul, which is considered the infinite part of you, to rise up above your flesh, and your mind, which are considered fallen. So, you discipline the mind through prayer, and through, not in fasting time, not watching cruelty, not speaking cruelty, not listening to cruel words. In fasting time, we fast from violence also, so we don't eat anything that bleeds. And the ritual of prayer, we pray standing so that we are participants in prayer. We remind ourselves that we're standing before God whenever we pray, so we're supposed to stand. And then we do what are called matanya. نغني لك اجزيو ونتقنع لسمك قدوس نسق لك اوز لك يسقت كلو برك ولك يتقنع كلو لسان انتو اتو املاك املك ويجزيا اجاست ونقص نقص املاك انتل كلوز سقا والكلاز الناس وانتيا واكا بكم مهرنا قدوس ولدك انزيل انتو موسى صوبت عليكم زبلو أبونا زب سمايات يتقدس اسمك تنصح منجستك ويكون في قدك بكم بسماي كما هو بمدر سيساينا زللتنا هبان اليوم هدق لنا بسان وجيجينا كمان هننين هدق لزاب بس لنا يتابعني زيو واستمن سود على رننا وبالحنم كروت كوي اسم زياكي تمنجست هاي وصفحات ولا معلم آمين بسلام القدوس جبريل ملاك أوغزتي مريم سلام لك دنجب هديناكي ودنجب سقاكي ما إغزابير تبوت سلام لك بركت أنت مناس وبرك فري كرسكي تفسيف ست من اتسقا إغزابير مسلكي سهالي وسهالي مرتب في كولكي يسوع كريستوس كمية سوالين هاتوينا زالمو آمين.
What is the significance or the place of prayer in the work that you do?
Prayer helps me to remain centered and focused and calm. It's a way of dealing with stress as well. Not worrying, having a ritual through which I relieve myself of worry. And, connecting with the infinite, connecting with a power that's greater than me, so that I realize that it's not my responsibility, or I don't take on the responsibility of changing human history, right? But realize that I'm but a small cog in an enormous mechanism for change that includes things that I may not understand or that I may not see. And that I'm working also for results that I likely will not see. Just to translate all of the manuscripts that have been taken with all of the people who are now living, who speak languages of African manuscript cultures, it's highly unlikely that we can even translate the volume of what we found in our collective lifetimes. And so the African Historical Society is meant to be an intergenerational institution. It has an intergenerational mission. That is, we see beyond our lifetimes to a future. And so prayer helps me to center myself in my finitude, in my limited nature, and realize that I'm here to play a certain role for a limited time and to pass the baton to the next generation so that they can continue the mission. And so prayer helps me to center myself in this sort of sense of a continuum that will reach beyond my finite life.
Dr. Leslie studied in part in Ethiopian monasteries with the permission of the present Patriarch, His Holiness Abuna Matthias. She has formed partnerships within and outside the continent.
I've been working with her for the last 5 years. Especially, she's a very, very important person in my life because of her dedication. About, I think, 15, 20 years ago, she came to Ethiopia to do research on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as well as the Ethiopian history. She's been dedicated all her life focusing on the African history, African society, African language, heritage, and culture. She worked with a lot of children's. She helped the church. She went to the furthest part of Ethiopia in the monasteries, spending time with the people, the monks, the priests. Her dedication is beyond belief.
Rachel is someone who I really appreciate. She's very focused. She's a great administrator, and I think she's also a very impressive scholar. She brings together different languages of medieval Africa, from Nubia, from Ethiopia, to do work that has never been done before.
All right, so you'll recall the last time that you were here, I did some exercises on the exercise bag over
I remember.
here. And so this time we're going to show you the portion of the library that I have here in Nigeria
Okay.
that I use for my essential. Hi, these are just some of my books. These are primarily reference books. This is a classical Ethiopic textbook.
My next visit takes me to Dr. Leslie's library, as this would be a great opportunity to explore the world of African history and culture. I am also here to discover rare books, other valuable resources, and manuscripts, but more importantly is to hear her read these manuscripts.
You look at that and you think, oh, that's just ordinary Arabic, right?
Okay.
But this is actually, this one that I have now, I think this is this is a 15th century Yoruba manuscript. So we have, as I was telling you, we have a young Yoruba PhD scholar who has joined the African Historical Society, and we got her to start translating this. So what she did was, I told her to take the Yoruba written with an Arabic alphabet and to translate it into Yoruba with a Latin alphabet. This is one manuscript in two languages, so these two languages are saying the same thing. So essentially,
So this is Yoruba.
a Yoruba speaker used the Arabic alphabet to write this.
Okay.
Okay, so these are saying the same thing. One is telling this story, which is in a moral play, is telling this story in Yoruba. This is Yoruba, written with the Arabic script. And now this is telling the same story in Yoruba with a Roman Latin script, right? This is Roman Latin script. And then we have our translators, after they translate from the Yoruba written with Arabic into the Yoruba written with a Latin script, we then finally translate it into English, written with a Latin script, right? Because this is not their alphabet. The Romans introduced this to England.
Yeah.
So this is English.
But this
written.
is
So this is the story.
Okay.
Yes. So this is what's written here in the Arabic. I hope you've been able to catch that on this camera. A farmer was going to the market to sell a child's carved toy. He placed it on a donkey. A little one saw him from where he was playing with his mates and ran after him to mock him. The little one said to him, "Peace be unto you, you with a donkey." And the farmer quickly replied, "And to you, my haughty and delightful child." That was how the little one was disgraced, because he never knew that's the reply he would get from the farmer. He returned to his mates, hanging his head in shame, and his mates started mocking him. And then there are questions. In the Yoruba written with the Arabic, there are questions about the encounter and how the people should feel and how people should be treated. And it's a moral lesson that was taught in Yoruba schools in Ilorin in the 15th century.
So, how many languages do you speak?
I speak German, French, English, Amharic, and Ge'ez. And then I read Coptic Egyptian, Old Nubian, and some Attic Greek. So now Coptic Egyptian and Old Nubian are no longer spoken languages. Although with Old Nubian there is some concurrence between Old Nubian and Noban. that are the languages that are spoken by people who are now in Nubia. You know, you may find some roots of the word similar and so on, but for the most part, Old Nubian is no longer a spoken language, nor is Coptic Egyptian, but we read it, right? So because there's this enormous, there are these enormous corpora of manuscripts, we learn to read it and we have ideas about how it was likely spoken.
How do we preserve our manuscripts? How do we preserve this culture and heritage that we have been blessed with as a continent?
Well, you know, what we're doing at the African Historical Society is exactly that. And so what we're doing is we are working on the digitization of these manuscripts and their migration to databases in Africa, and backing them up with cloud data systems and other systems, and also working with European archives that are holding these manuscripts, and many of them have digitized many of them already. Some have already digitizing African manuscripts, and so I'm meeting with one of the largest archives in the world, and that's in Europe, in 2 days. That is very interested in sharing their digital archives with the African Historical Society, and we are our systems are open access. So the African Historical Society ICT portal is open access so that people can see these manuscripts for free. And access them. And then if they want to take courses with us, we also offer courses to teach the alphabets and to teach how to read them. Right. And so that's how we preserve these African manuscript cultures. And we're launching at all of our affiliated universities programs for the study of African manuscript cultures. We submitted the program for the study of African manuscript cultures to the Department of Linguistics and African Languages here at University of Ibadan, for example, and we provided curricula for teaching Ge'ez and Coptic Egyptian. We launched a historical archaeology course here so that people can understand how we use manuscripts, primary sources to write history. And so we're doing that at each one of our affiliated universities, just as we submitted all of this information and skills and methodologies to the University of Ibadan. We are also doing that at Addis Ababa University and with University of Cape Town and with, you know, all of the universities that are affiliated with us. And
Dr. Leslie, I'm just curious to know.
Dr. Leslie's work inspires a new generation of African scholars and leaders.
well, what excites me the most about Africa right now is the awakening that I see happening with the African youth and the impact that the information age is having with information technology, artificial intelligence, and the sorts of questions that African youth are asking, their access to information and knowledge, and the potential for real progress and social development that can give rise to if we take advantage of this moment and if they're guided properly. And so, you know, institutions like ours, the African Historical Society, we're really, really excited about the opportunities that presents for reshaping or for impacting the African psyche and our place in the world and how we understand our place in the world and interact with it. I think that's what's most exciting to me in Africa right now. I can say early on when we were doing our fact finding here, and I went around the continent to African villages, the thing that struck me was the smartphone was everywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, in the remotest villages,
everyone has a smartphone.
You saw a smartphone, and so that really excited me. I was like, that means that we can get information to the farthest reaches of the continent and really impact the way in which people think and what they know about themselves in the world and how they understand their place in it. So this awakening or quickening, if you would, of the consciousness is what most excites me.
And of course, it does speak about the potentialities for the continent
Yes.
in the coming years as well.
Yes, indeed.
Wow, what a remarkable and incredible journey. Dr. Rachel Titilayo Leslie is truly an amazing African. And his story does it for us on this episode of the program. But you can keep a date with us across all our social media platforms. From the ancient city of Ibadan, I am Kelly Egiga, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.